Sanctum is a project that aims to make all of staked SOL liquid, supercharging Solana DeFi and improving both users' yields and the overall Solana user experience. They've been building liquid staking solutions for over 2 years, if I remember correctly. I think you guys used to be called Socian. And if you've used an LST, you may have used a solution they've already built. They aim to unify the liquidity behind all the LSTs, creating instant liquidity and ease of use across all of Solana DeFi. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, and then give yourself a little introduction and maybe a little history, Sanctum.
No, that was great. Thank you, Kimo. Yeah, we've actually been building for something like 3 years, February 2021. And if you've used any LST, you've definitely used Sanctum because, so Gito Sol, B Sol, they all use this SPL stake pool program, and we actually helped to write this program way back in 2021. So we've been here building on liquid staking since 2021. We used to be Socian, right? Just running a stake pool. We realized that the stake pool wasn't big enough. We wanted to do something that was truly sort of groundbreaking. That's why we built this unified liquidity layer so that all the rest of the stake pools could go big.
I think we'll toss it to Slorg first this time, and then I'll go second.
Yep, we'll switch things up a bit. So just to start at layman square one, why should people even stake their SOL? Because I want to hold my SOL and I want to trade my SOL and flip these meme coins and make 10 million% profits, right? If I lock my SOL up for 7% APY, I'm kind of crippling my ability to do that, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for the longest time, right, this is the fundamental dilemma that people face, right? Which is that, as you said, right, I want to help secure the network, right? I want to earn 7%, but at the same time, I kind of don't, right? I want to, do all those shitcoin things that you said and move it and flip it and so on, right? And the promise of liquid staking tokens, the promise of these LSTs, right, is that you really can do both, right? So if you think about staking as locking your SOL into a vault, in like gold bars into a vault and locking the door and stuff, right? A liquid staking token is basically like a piece of paper, like an IOU over the gold bars in the vault. And the idea is that the liquid staking token is just as easy as SOL to trade around, to flip, and so on. And so you're able to do both things, right? Both get, the yield from staking and do all these other things that you want to do with your SOL. Right, so that is the promise of liquid staking tokens.
What is the current breakdown of Solana in the ecosystem? Like, what percent is staked, what percent is unstaked, and then what percent of the staked is liquid staked?
Yeah, great question. So we have of 100 SOL, right? About 1/3 is not staked, so that's just regular SOL, and 2/3 is staked, right? And within that 2/3, right, there's 5% of that, right, that is liquid staked right now, right? So it's something like 3.3% of total SOL is liquid staked. And let me just send you guys a pie chart in a bit. Yeah.
Why is that number so low? Like, that seems extremely low.
Yeah, it is. And truth be told, I wrote, we've been thinking about this for years, right? And I think the answer is that stake pools, right? By stake pools, I mean Marinade, Jiro, Soulblaze, etc. Just have, just do not appeal very much to most users. And that's the answer I think I can give you.
I saw a quick audience question. If someone's asking, I assume a lot of people are thinking it. So, what is the difference between liquid staking and traditional staking?
Right. So, traditional staking is as I mentioned, you put your SOL, you lock it up, right? The gold bars in the vault and so on, right? And liquid staking is when you give your SOL to a protocol. That protocol helps to put the same thing, do the same thing on the back end, but they give you a piece of paper like an IOU, right? And in this case, IOU is LST, right? MSOL, BSOL, GDO SOL, etc. Right? And with that IOU, right, that token is the piece of paper that you can then move around easily without accessing the gold bars inside the vault, which is very hard to access. So the idea is that liquid staking will just allow you to do all the things that you want to do with your SOL, right? But also at the same time earn staking yields.
I'm going to follow up there. So with traditional staking, as I understand, there's about a 2-day period for you to get your funds back from the validator, right? And with liquid staking, you don't have that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's one of the key reasons why liquid staking has potential. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So effectively, liquid staking gets you the benefits and benefits the network as well of traditional staking, but you also are able to do all the fun sorts of things that you want to do and participate in the economy simultaneously, right?
That's the promise. Yes. Yeah.
I guess what are the risks of this then? What are the downsides, or are there only upsides to it?
Oh, I mean, yeah, for sure there are downsides, right? One of them that people always talk about is smart contract risk. And I don't think at this point like that is actually a problem anymore, right? Because liquid staking, like at least the contract that we helped to write, that has been running on mainnet for 2.5 years now. That secures more than 10 billion. It has never been exploited. It probably will never be exploited. I mean, you never know, but that it has been very, very battle tested at this point, and so it's one of the safest, I think, smart contracts out there. But let me tell you also about one risk that does happen, and this is the quote unquote DPEG risk, right? So liquid staking tokens, in order for them to be liquid, they need to have a big pool of SOL, right? So when you want to go from, for example, MSOL or GeoSol, and you want to instantly unstake, right? There's no magic trick here. You can't skip the 2-day wait. But what you can do is if there's is a pool, you need a pool of Solana, which is there to absorb the LST that you give it, MSOL, GDOSOL, etc., and give you the SOL right away, right? And in a case where there isn't enough SOL for that, right, then you're not able to get the benefits of liquidity, and so then you're back to sort of like the native staking where you have to wait 2 days, right? And so many times when people sell in a lot of MSOL or BSOL, right, this causes the price to drop momentarily because there isn't enough sort of SOL to service this kind of instant sale.
Gotcha. What is the traditional version of liquid staking, and what is this version that Sanctum is proposing? That I think the words you use are it transitions from a PvP to a PvE dynamic.
Yeah, so let me tell you guys a little bit of a history lesson, right? So when we started building liquid staking on Solana, we didn't know any better, right? This was 2021, very early days, and basically every protocol building was basically just, on Ethereum, you have this winner take all thing, right? There is one player in the liquid staking market. There's Lido, which is like, all of the stake essentially, right? And then there's like Rocket Pool a distant second, and then there are these tiny, tiny competitors, right? And so everybody thought that liquid staking was a winner take all, and that's PvP, right? And there used to be two big players, Marinade and Lido on Solana, and then there was us, right? And then because everyone thought, okay, this is a PvP game, right? So they basically gave out like millions of dollars of their token every single week in order to try and win in order to try and do liquidity mining, basically, right? To attract liquidity to their protocol. And so we looked at this and we said, I don't want to play this game. This is a zero-sum game. It's all going to be farmed by Alameda anyway, right? So let's try and take a step back. Let's try and let's try and think about like how we can actually, solve this problem from the root, right? And the key thing that we realize is that the problem with liquid staking is liquidity. Fundamentally, as I said, you need a pool of SOL you need a strong pool of SOL that's always available to accept the LSTs that are being sold on the market, right? Now the problem is that when everyone's fighting for this own liquidity pool, you have a very fragmented market, right? And everyone's trying to fight for their own liquidity. So my thinking was, instead of trying to fight for our own share of liquidity and paying millions of dollars to incentivize this, why don't we build this unified liquidity layer? Why don't we combine everyone's liquidity together such that we can all benefit, right? And so we did this, right? Like that's what we have been building on and on for the past years. And now we have this unified liquidity layer. So it doesn't matter which LST you are, right? MSOL, BSOL, GDOSOL, LST, LaneSOL, whatever, right? Doesn't matter, right? You are able to tap into this unified liquidity layer, which is deeper than any single one, right? So that's the difference, right? And the difference here is that in Ethereum, right, or in Solana's old days, everyone's fighting for their share of liquidity, PvP. Now we're saying, hey, let's grow the pie together. Let's grow this liquidity pool together, right? Let's open it up to everybody, right? And that's a PvE mode, right? Does that make sense?
Yes. So it creates the circumstances where much smaller liquidity or liquid staking tokens can still survive and participate I guess my question to you then would be, what's the benefit of having multiple, potentially thousands of liquid
Mhm.
staking tokens on the market?
Yeah, wonderful, right? So, basically in the past, the barriers to entry was so high, right? When you have this fragmented liquidity and you cannot borrow other people's liquidity, in order to just start a liquid staking token, it's basically impossible unless you have millions of dollars, right? So we raised like, 5.5 million, right, from investors because they invested in us and they gave us a lot of money in order to play this game, right? They wanted us to fight this war, right? We didn't want to, right? And so moving forward, now that we've unified it, you have all these tiny little LSTs that can work, right? And your question was why, right? Why do we need all these tiny little LSTs? Unjito and Marinate, etc. Good enough, right? And to answer this, I'll give you sort of two reasons, right? First is that empirically, look, with everybody pushing that, all these big players with millions of dollars have been pushing all this, trying to get more and more TVL. And after 2.5 years, like, it hasn't moved. It hasn't moved at all, right? Like it's been 3% and creeping up to 4%. And this to me is like the proof, is in the pudding, right? It's just like people don't want stake pools as much as you think that they do, right? And but since we've started to launch all these new LSTs, right? So we've had, before we had a few, and then in the past month we've launched something like 14 new LSTs, right? And with all these tiny LSTs, these new LSTs, you have an explosion of innovation, right? You're getting, for let me give you an example. I think everyone here must have heard of Bongsol, right? Now, Bongsol in and of itself, it's not a stake pool, it's a validator pool. And the one sort of gimmick is that if you hold Bongsol, you get free bonk, right? And there are many people who would never consider stake pools before, but not let's say not the most sophisticated DeFi users, right? But what do they know? They know, oh, I love bonk. They know, oh, I love Sol, right? And if I hold bonk Sol, it's like Sol, except I get free bonk, right? And so like this is a very different sort of value proposition, from the original sort of stake pools, which is like, oh, decentralize the network, blah blah blah, right? And that those are fine, those appeal to a niche audience, but then we have Bongsol, which is suddenly appealing to a completely different audience, some non-DeFi native people, some more like a meme coin kind of guys, right? Another one like Raposa Soul, right? Hold Raposa Soul, get free coffee, right? Again, lots of interesting ideas there. And of course, we have these validator tokens, validator LSTs, right? Lane Soul, Compass Soul, Solana like Hub Soul, etc., right? All of these guys are giving you, sharing with you their block rewards, their ME rewards, and the yields are actually much higher than the ones that you get from Marinate and Jito, right? And so again, it's not that Marinate and Jito don't have like a place in the ecosystem. It's just that now you have 1,000 different more choices for you to choose as a staker. Where do you want to put your soul? Now you have 1,000 reasons to choose this LST, that LST, and you can see like the innovation, right? The competition that just goes way up, which is good for all of us.
Okay, so with monopolized LSTs, like the case on Ethereum, you don't really have any options. You're just kind of subject
Yeah.
to their rules and their terms and their value props. But with the unified liquidity layer, more LSTs can survive and compete and even test new dynamics and value propositions, thus allowing them to appeal to more groups. Is that kind of the idea?
That's exactly correct, right? So in 3 years, like where's the innovation from Lido, right? Lido's too comfortable; they do nothing, right? But in 1 month we've launched 14 different LSTs, right? And every single one is so competitive. They have to try all different things in order to get stake. They have to sing for their supper, right? So this innovation, this competition, right? This is something only possible in Solana. It's not possible in Ethereum because you have this massive barrier to entry, millions of dollars you need to put in before you can even start your LST. Here, you can start with $2 if you want, right? We handle the liquidity for you, right? So that's exactly right. Like we have this fantastic Cambrian explosion of innovative new models, right? Which is going to benefit consumer in the end.
Gotcha. I saw a question I want to ask really quick, but does this increase decentralization? Long term, does this possibly mean Solana will become more decentralized than Ethereum?
Oh yes, absolutely, right? So look at Ethereum. Ethereum is just doomed. Like it's you have like so proof of stake network, right? Ethereum proof of stake, Solana proof of stake, right? You have one entity controlling 32% of the entire Ethereum supply, right? And at 33%, you have liveness violations, right? Technically, someone with 33% can cause the entire chain to just shut off, right? Like now, Realistically, is that going to happen? Probably not, right? But still, like potentially that is a problem. So huge centralization risk there, right? And like when we talk about centralization risk, right, it's not just about this theoretical attacks, right? It's also the fact that a lot, what is Lido governed by? The LDO holders, right? The token holders, right? And you have these token holders, most of whom are VCs, right? Most of whom have massive, and these few VCs or few rich individuals are controlling the entire Ethereum blockchain, right? They have the fate of the blockchain, in their hands. So this is a plutocratic governance layer that's holding the entire chain hostage, right? And that's very dangerous, right? And I mean, not to mention, of course, it's strangling innovation, right? As I said, right? They don't need to innovate because they don't have to innovate because they're just this massive monopoly fat cat, right? Just sitting there, right? Good for Lido, bad for ecosystem, right? So we saw this. We knew that like we better not we better make sure this does not happen to Solana. So that's why we built what we built.
So I have a follow up there. I'm curious, if every LST on Solana is sharing the same stake pool, does that pose a centralization risk, though it is a little bit different than Lido?
Yeah. So yeah, it is different. So every single one of them is using the same program, right? But the programs are controlled, like it doesn't. So basically, what do we mean by centralization? The problem with Lido here is that it's one entity controlling all the stake, right? But the program is controlled by multi-sig and it's going to be frozen in the future. So nobody will control that, right? The worry with Lido is that if you have a lot of stake, you can then decide where does that stake go. You can choose to say, okay, I'm gonna delegate to this, I'm gonna censor this, I'm not gonna stake to this guy because I don't like him, right? When you have all of these different stake pools, right? All of these different LSTs, right? Then there's no single one entity they can say, hey, Amir, I don't like you. I can't, I don't want to stake with you anymore, right? Because, Amir from Solana Hub has his own stake, right? You're not going to say, Lane, I don't want to stake with you anymore. You can't control it, right? Users are control it. Whoever is staking to HubSol, to LaneSol, to CompassSol, they are the ones who control it, right? So instead of one entity, Marinate, Jito, whatever, who is holding so much SOL and deciding where to put in all that SOL to validators, we have, millions of users collectively deciding where do they want to park their SOL. So it's massively much more decentralized.
Sweet. What's the rough timeline on that program becoming immutable, if you have one?
So it's a good question. I think we're close. I think we would, as much as we would like to get it immutable, there are risks of the program being immutable, right? So
Right.
you are balancing two risks. One is that, of course, if you hold the program upgrade authority, then yes, there's technically a rug possible, right? But on the other hand, if you made it immutable, and then there's some, Solana upgrades to 1.21 or 1.22, so 2 years in the future, there's some change, and then you realize, oh, this change interacts with this program in a way that's, causes a bug or something, right? And it's immutable, you can't change it, right? And
Right.
that's
And that's a big problem too.
that might be catastrophic. I mean, okay, it's one of the most used programs, so probably nothing will break. They would make sure to check that it doesn't have a regression or something like this, but that is possible. So what I'm saying is that freezing the program has its own risk. It's not like freezing means gold standard, not necessarily.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty large general perception of freezing being a good thing, but I think people kind of take the network itself as if it is already immutable, and it isn't. So,
yeah, if the network was
yeah.
frozen and the programs were frozen, great, right?
Easy
But
peasy.
the network's
But
a moving target, right? It goes down sometimes, it changes a lot, right? So is freezing a good thing? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard decision to make. Is this the same program as your original stake pool program that you built with Labs? And is that program frozen, or have you played with that at all?
Right. So the initial stake pool program, the SPL stake pool program, the one that powers Jito Sol, B-Sol, as well as all our partner LSTs, that's not frozen. So none of the programs are frozen, to be clear, right? We have actually a new program, that's the Infinity program. That was a new program that we built. So that is a new program, and we needed to build a new program because Infinity is unlike any other stake pool. We haven't talked about Infinity yet, but Infinity is like the first LST of LSTs, right? Or basket of LSTs. So stake pools can't normally hold other LSTs, right? We can, right? So that required a new program, new contract. But that's little bit less battle tested, but of course it's been audited 3 times by the best in the business. So we trust it. Yeah.
Yeah, sweet. You launched a program. I think was it you guys that did UnStakeIt?
Oh yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Unstake. Yeah.
How did that work? Could you detail that a little bit?
Yep. So again, right, the problem we were trying to solve was this liquidity mode, right? This fragmented liquidity, right? And we saw, like Saber pools, Orca pools, you have MSOL, so, like let's say for one asset you have like Orca, Saber, Radium, like all these three different pools, and then like multiply by the number of stake pools, so you have like 3 times 3, like 9, 10, 20 different pools. And we thought like this is very inefficient, right? It's number one, it's fragmented, and number two, like you don't even need the other side of the pool there, right? Like this is a bit of a technical point, so bear with me. But like, well, let's say you have got Jito Soul. You want to go from Jito Soul to Soul, right? And usually, with like a Orca pool or whatever, you've got half Jito Soul, half Soul, right? Well, the thing is that the Jito Soul doesn't even need to be in the pool, because if you want to go from Soul to Jito Soul, right? It's very easy. Just stake it, right? And you can do that in any size, right? So it's whereas it's really the soul that matters. You really care about the soul, so you can absorb the Jito soul unstake, right? And so we thought, like, what's the most possible, like most capital efficient possible design, right? What's the design that like is the 100% like best, right? So the 100% best solution is a single pool of soul, right? It accepts every single LST, right? And it just does unstake, and it doesn't need to hold half of the assets. It doesn't need to be split into 20 different pools, right? So it's the platonic ideal, I think, of of an unstake pool, if that makes sense.
Yeah, cool. So I have an analogy that might help people understand sort of the significance of this, at least the way I see it. I would, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here. So as Fire Dancer is to TPS, I think this is to the Solana centralization. Would you say that's accurate?
Oh, I love that, actually. Yes, yes. I,
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
I think so.
Cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, like the magnitude of this is pretty intense. So, Lord, do you want to keep going?
Yep, just a couple more, then we'll pass it to Chemo's section. So, what is your revenue model? Are you guys
Mhm.
taking a percentage of the validator commissions?
Okay, great. So we don't have a single revenue model. We've actually built like lots of products that are plugged in deep within the ecosystem, and we get revenues there. So we have the reserve pool, which is a pool of soul that's just sitting there and accepts sort of instant unstakes, supports instant unstakes from any LST and stake account. Obviously, we take fees from that. That makes us money. We have this thing called a Sanctum router, right? Depends on what brand of English you speak, and that sort of powers, I think, a large proportion of swaps through Jupiter, right? So if you go on Jupiter and you go from Jito Sol to B Sol or whatever, right, Lane Sol to Compass Sol, a lot of the times it will say powered by Sanctum or via Sanctum, right? We'll take like a fee on that as well. So we anytime someone does a swap, they'll go through us. Infinity, right? Infinity is the newest product that we've built. That one takes fees as well, right? We have an integration with Soulflare. Soulflare does instant unstakes on their wallet. We have take fees as well, right? So we have multiple ways of taking fees across the ecosystem. Now, your question was, do we take with the validated LSTs? Currently, we do not. We are really interested in working with these partners to just grow them as large as possible. Now, will we ever take fees in the future? I can't say for sure, but right now we do not.
Yeah, that's interesting. I really enjoy sort of the micro transaction, like or even smaller than maybe nano transaction model. There's a lot of smaller protocols that are experimenting with it, and I think when you have pretty significant volume, it can actually be pretty big. And I like that you haven't attached yourself to validator rewards, because that kind of opens up the playing field for validators themselves to do well and experiment with incentivization.
Yeah, I mean, I will say our router has done fantastically well, right? So on Jupiter we've done like 500 million of volume, right? And on every kind of swap we're taking fees on that as well. Yeah.
This is a question I posed to Adrastia, but what do you feel is the biggest constraint to growing the number of overall users in the space?
I think it's honestly, I think it's UX. I think like I've been in this space for 3 years, right, building, and I think Solana actually has a great has a great wallet like Phantom and stuff, but even that is not enough, right? Like I've told them about my project and then they get really excited. They're like, oh yeah, this sounds great. How do I support? And I was like, oh yeah, they go to the App Store, download Phantom, and then they open it. I was like, okay, sure. And then they download it. I was like, what the hell is this seed phrase thing, right? And then that's like, it gets stuck. It's like, the moment those 12 words come up, on their phone and they think they have, they know they have to write it down on the paper somewhere, you've lost them. You know what I mean? Like they're like, oh, I'll do it later, and then it's over, right? So I think that is like the biggest problem, and that's why centralized exchanges are so popular, right? Like because there isn't this like fumbling around with this secret phrase kind of business. I mean, like self custody super important, but like the UX needs to change. We need a better way, for people to do it rather than write down your seed phrase on a piece of paper. Like that's just not gonna work. So that's what I think the largest. I mean, in my experience, trying to sort of tell people to join in, right? That's always the biggest blocker. Yeah.
What is the purpose or use case of your token? Is it going to be a governance token?
Yes, it will be a governance token. I actually have written like a little tweet on what I think governance tokens are best used for. I've learned a lot from how Jupiter does it, right? And I think so. 3 lessons I took away. The first lesson for Jupiter is that don't be in such a rush to decentralize, right? And and they execute. Jupiter. What Meow had a post to say, we are not building for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. We are building for a decade, right? 10 years at least, right? And I think we've been building for 3 years. We're gonna be here at least another 3 more, but looking like 10 years, right? And so, if we rush to be like revenue sharing, or we ask the community, hey, what should we build next, or like how should we share fees? Like I think this is a distraction because we are building foundational infrastructure here, right? The first and most important thing, right, is to secure the long-term future of the protocol's development. Right. And then once we do that, then we can promise like, okay, let's open it up. But I mean, to be frank, right, having been in this space for so long and having thought about this, day in, day out for so long, I think I know more about liquid staking on Solana than anybody else, right? And so, I'm not about to sort of let people tell me what I should be doing next because I think I know better, right? I know it sounds a bit braggy, but it's just true, right? So second thing, right? You want your governance, give people something really, really meaningful to do, right? A lot of governance at the end of the day, it's just bribing markets. It's like vaults. I mean, what is it? Like vaults and gauges and bribing and all this stuff, right? And this is okay. I mean, this is fine. But I think if you do that, you are dead. This is moving from a let's grow the space, let's grow really big. It's moving from growing to like, oh, let's sit back and take profit. Like let's play these little games about like, oh, let's point this soul and that soul. Like I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that right now. I want to grow Sanctum, grow from 5% to 100% of liquid stake soul, right? There's so much more to do, right? And what I love about Jupiter is, we're here right now, right? Like Jupiter, this utility, you're giving people some real meaningful stuff, right? Voting on the next project that can come onto LFG. Every single one of these projects that come onto LFG and gets voted on, right? They have the potential to be the next Jupiter, to be the next unicorn, to be even bigger than Jupiter even, right? So I think that's very meaningful, getting people to vote, right? So giving people something really useful to do and meaningful to do, right? That isn't just playing all these, games with the gauges and the bribing. Right. And
Yeah.
the third thing I would say, right, is like do not, I would say keep it simple, right? Like 2 years ago we had this like crazy VE curve. I don't know if you remember, like lock for 3 years, this curve model, right? Lock for 1 year, you get VE curve tokens, 3 years, 5 years, blah blah blah, right? What I like about Jupiter, they kept it simple. Lock for 30 days, linear unlock, beautiful, right? Like you don't need to. It's a show of strength, right? You don't need to overcomplicate it. You just say, hey, like our product is really good. You can sell the token if you want. You're going to regret it in 5 years, right? Like I don't need to lock you up. You're going to regret it anyway, right? So I really like that. So those are my 3 takeaways.
Yeah, that's interesting. I really love the point that you made about decentralization over time. I think like almost every token DAO that's existed has, oh, I say almost, but there's a few good ones, but almost every one who launches, and especially on Solana, seems to have gotten caught up in the idea of like decentralization from the get-go. And like those things, that's not how humans work. Like it takes time to build all these systems. Bitcoin started centralized, right? Like every blockchain, every protocol, everything has always started centralized. And I think like there's a few tokens and DAOs that launched in early 22 that sort of were like, all right, all the tokens are here, and now we're going to vote on everything. And it's like, well, you didn't design any meaningful systems for people to participate in and contribute to and build together over time. So I really, really enjoy that answer.
You're absolutely right. Let me just add like one short thing, right? Which is that there's some things where you want to sort of decentralize from the get-go. So for example, our Sanctum like program, right? That is under multi-sig day zero, right? Like no
Right.
compromises there, right? Because of obviously, right? Safety is paramount, right? But at the same time, like look at Jupiter, we have these working groups of stuff. There's a lot of decentralization, but Jupiter is not asking like, oh guys, how should we design our routing algorithm? That's
Exactly.
not something that 99.99% of people are not going to have a better answer than Jupiter team themselves. So obviously, this is not something you decentralize, right? Things like almost like, how do we charge fees? That's also, I think, a business decision, right? Where you have a lot of strategic context and a long enough time horizon, right? Like if you're a token holder, you're vesting, you're like, oh, give me the money now, right? But if you're a founder, if you're a Meow, you're thinking, I need to hire for 5 years, 10 years, right? I don't want to give up the revenue to token holders, even if it pumps the bag in the short term, right? So there are a lot of things that some things should be decentralized from day one. Some things should be decentralized, like, only like far into the future. Yep.
Yeah, it's one thing to decentralize critical risks from the get-go, but the other side of it, the more subjective stuff, the more people building and community building and just sort of co-creation is something that has to take real human time.
All right, I have one last question before we pass it over to Chemo's section. What would you say is your biggest obstacle as a product?
That's a great question. The one thing I sort of always like admire and envy Jupiter for is like the project is such a retail, like people just get it, right? Like you don't even have to, what the hell, people don't have to explain it. You go to jupe.ag, right? Very short link, very nice link, and immediately the value proposition is right there, right? Buy, sell token, right? And for a long time, we don't have this retail, we don't have a strong user touch point, right? We've been building fantastic infrastructure, infrastructure that underpins, like it's systemically important for every single LST on Solana, right? That's causing the smooth functioning of all LSTs, that's making all these Borrowland protocols. Like, why do you guys think that these Borrowland protocols can have like billions of dollars in TVL? It's actually because Sanctum has joined the liquidity underlying it, right? So that, they can do these like big, liquidations if SOL price drops, right? This is what we have done, and we have done really good work. So the people in the space, like insiders, founders, etc., DeFi founders, they know that we are so good. But but again, like we didn't have a product. We don't have this, product that people can use every day, right? All this infrastructure is all in the back end, right? So that is, I think, my biggest obstacle, right? How do I explain to retail who are not such DeFi insiders that Sanctum is systemically important and doing good, right? And that's where we have this, idea of like, hey, let's bring LSTs to the world and let's help other people, do our distribution for us in some sense, right? Now we have Infinity, so that's a pretty good sort of retail, thing that people can go in. But still, like I'm always going to be envious of Jupiter because like you maybe you deposit into Sanctum like once, right? But then how many times are you using Jupiter a day? Like possibly 100 times, right? So that's something like I would say is a big obstacle, getting that message out, to retail, I would say. Yeah.
Get away.
Yeah, I think you've answered quite a few of our questions, or my questions, just in the back and forth. But I'm curious about the projects that you've already launched with Sanctum LSTs. Is there any of those that you're particularly excited about? And maybe is there any upcoming ones that you're...
Yes. So I think, like I think you're putting me on the spot a bit because, we have Launch 14. I love all of them, right? I don't want to be seen of like, saying something that this one's good means that one's bad. They're all good, right? I think for strong yields, right? There are like, if you want the highest yields, there are 4. There's Pico Sol, Compass Sol, Lane Sol, and Hub Sol. And Juicy Sol. How can I forget? Like these 5. Right, these 5 are giving like extra yield. So this is like almost like twice the APY than you would get from just sort of native staking or staking with Jito or Marinade, for example. Right. So those are for pure yields, right? And then we have things that are a little bit more gamified, right? We have City Soul in the works, Bonk Soul, as you know, getting Bonk airdrop. I don't know what the APY of that is. Depends on the price of bonk, I guess. So I think that's really interesting. And then like we have a couple more in the pipeline. We have one called Path Soul. We're working with an NFT project to do this, using Path Soul to pioneer up-only NFTs, right? So NFTs in which you can't lose the money that you put in to mint the NFT. So you always can, get a full refund for your money, always get your money back. So that's something I'm really excited for, not because of the yields, but just because like, hey, this is something that nobody has ever done with an LST before, right? I'm really excited to do Raposa Soul with Raposa Coffee, same thing, right? Who has ever done, coffee, like get free coffee from holding an LST, right? And then there's one that I'm really, really, really excited about, which I cannot tell you, but then you guys, and I'm sure you guys will be super excited about it, and that will come on Monday.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like there's this whole layer to yield that hasn't been played with in terms of like how it can fund things long term, how it can fund rewards mechanisms and loyalty mechanisms for communities, and I think it's pretty interesting to allow that for even small players in the ecosystem, like an NFT project or a coffee shop or any of these things. So the higher APY on the four that you mentioned in the beginning, is that because of all the priority fee mess? For those of you who don't know, on Solana, priority fees are somewhat implemented incorrectly, and so there's a lot of people overpaying. Is that distribution? Is that what's boosting the distribution there?
Well, I mean, I think to some extent, yes, right? So like, I think a lot of people are overpaying, and there's been congestion and stuff. And I think, like, I mean, validators are printing right now, right? Like they're making so much fucking money, and that's good, right? Good for them, because they were also here since like Solana was $8 and having a lot of pain. So they deserve it absolutely.
Losing money, yeah.
Right now,
yeah, totally.
right? So good on them, absolutely good and good for us too, because I hold all of this stake sold in Infinity. I don't. So 1.18 is coming up, right? There are going to be changes to the scheduler, the priority fees, right? Stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, your guess is as good as mine whether the APY will go down or not. But nonetheless, I think like there's this new meta, right, that we've pioneered, right, of validators sharing their priority fees, sharing their block rewards, sharing their MEV, right, and that just makes it a no-brainer. Like if you're native staking, why the hell are you doing it, right? Like like if you're worried about smart contract, like if it's good enough for Jito, like if it's good enough for multi-coin, like, it's good enough for you, like. I mean, not to be flippant about like smart contract risk, obviously, but at this point, like it's been securing $10 billion worth of SOL. So like there's, yeah, and then
there's a lot at risk if you're worried about your 50 SOL stake.
Exactly, right? So and then you're getting like so much more APY that you're not getting from native staking. So and it's free. It is free. We do not charge and do not plan to charge this sort of like management fee. Stake pools charge management fees. These validated LSTs do not, right? It's always going to be free to deposit. It's deposit stake accounts, and it's always going to be free to withdraw from these as well. So it's a strictly better experience than native staking. What are you waiting for, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, super interesting. Let's see what I got left. Are there any sort of common misconceptions that you'd like to clarify around liquid staking or staking in general?
Yes, like tons. I mean, okay, so first of all, and this is something that I think like even, quote unquote smart VCs get wrong, right? And a lot of them are like us always saying like, oh, you guys are doing liquid staking, right? You guys are gonna, how are you guys gonna compete with Jito? Like how are you guys gonna be the lighter on Solana, right? And when someone says this, right, I just understand that like, it's a clear, like, to me, it becomes clear that they have misunderstood what we are doing here, right? Because we are not competing with Jito, we're not competing with Blaze, right? We're not competing with any of these guys. We are building the liquidity layer underneath, right, to make sure that these stake pools or these LSTs can be as big as possible, right? We are not trying to swallow anyone up or vampire attack anybody, right? Now, I will grant you that like individual LSTs, are competing, right, with these, like basically, the ones on the top layer, those guys are competing, right? But even then, right, there is still, as I said, 95% of, of stake up for grabs. So why are you fighting for this 5%? You shouldn't, right? So so people misunderstand. People always think, oh, we're trying to be the centralized player, we're trying to be the new Lido, we're trying to be like the biggest stake pool. That could not be further from the truth. We want all of these LSTs to be as big as possible, right? And then of course we are going to make tons of money too, because when these LSTs get huge, there's going to be lots of trading volume, and we take all of the trading volume, right? So
Right.
that, like, people misunderstand sort of like the business model of where Sanctum is going. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, and I imagine didn't Lido leave Solana at some like at the lows or something? If they did
Yeah.
come back, do you think they would use Sanctum?
They will use Sanctum. There's an interesting tweet about from my co-founder. I love it. I'm gonna share it here, which is that we should, ST Sol, right? This is the old Lido ticker for
Yep.
Stake Sol. He said that
Yep.
ST Sol. So now ST Sol is basically like a meme coin, and it's up only because you can only withdraw from ST Sol. So the supply is only going down. You can't deposit more at all. So you should buy it. We were thinking of just buying it, making a meme coin, right? It's the symbol of Solana domination. Like Ethereum tried come to eat our lunch. We told them fuck off, and now they've gone back. And I just love this idea of ST Sol being a meme coin, right? No, I mean, like, you know what? I think, why did Lido leave? Like, everyone thought that Lido was gonna win for sure because they have like fucking, they are like printing money on Ethereum. Like, we just thought that they could win. But you know why they can't win? They can't win because the mindset to win is different. They thought that they can bring the Ethereum playbook onto Solana and win this way. But this is not how it works. This is not how it works on Solana. This is not how staking works on Solana, right? We are
Right.
working together, PvE mindset, right? And if you're trying to play this playbook, you're gonna lose, no matter how many millions of dollars you pump it in, right? So after pumping in like hundreds of millions of dollars in liquidity and rewards, they had to turn tail behind and it's like, okay, sorry guys, we can't do this.
Okay, we're done.
That's
Yeah.
mindset.
Yeah.
Wrong mindset. Doesn't matter how much money you have.
Yeah. How are you dealing with the current Solana congestion? How might it have impacted you and the things you're working on?
Oh gosh. I have to apologize to our users because, like, until last, like, 2 weeks ago, we didn't have priority fees, and like, there were so many users who wanted to come in, and we just didn't have, and the transactions just weren't going through, and I felt so bad, right? Like, because these are people literally lining up to give me money, and I'm like, guys, sorry, it's not going through. But yeah, it did affect us a lot, and this is very hard to get right, but we've implemented priority fees already, and since then, right, we haven't got any complaints anymore, right? So
Sweet.
that has been very helpful. But like, we had to work, like, my co-founders had to work very hard to to build that feature.
Right. Yeah, sweet. Cool. I think I'm pretty much done. I don't know, Slorg, if there's anything in our document that you want to cover, but I think we covered almost all the questions. But I will take your hot take, as I asked at Estrella. Where do you feel the space will head in 3 to 5 years? And what are your opinions or hot takes that might be out there or outside of the norm?
This is, I think so. I want Solana to be money, right? I think Ethereum, as I said, I think Ethereum is doomed, right? I can see a case for BTC, right, as being this digital gold, and the fact that it doesn't have any features is itself a feature because it's like this
Right.
right? And I think ETH is
Bunker.
in this kind of like no man's land where it's too slow to be a chain you actually use, but then it has too much features, too many, they're still building it and stuff, right? So it's, so I think like Solana is going to be like number 2 for sure, right? And I think like what we are trying to build here is this like Sol economy. So I would really love it if, Sol became money, right? Sol is something you hold, to hold. Sol is something you hold to get a coffee subscription or Helium mobile subscription, right? Or
Right.
like paying artists like in a Patreon, right? Like have holding Slog Soul to support his work, or Chemo Soul to support his work, etc. I think like that would be like insane. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
That would be that's my dream.
I'm very curious about that. That's super interesting. The idea of a personality-based liquid staking token, I guess, is possible now. Like, I'm a big influencer now. I've got 150,000 tokens. I could pay a dev to set up a validator,
Yeah,
and then I could have my own. Right, or I can just go to you and have my own liquid staking token. Right.
Exactly. We can set it up for you today if you after the AMA. That would be sick. Yeah.
That's funny. A couple of my friends are working on the validator. They might be mad at me. That's funny. That's fascinating. I think that there's like that's a really interesting idea. How do you see it, like, a few years down the line as Solana's inflation decreases? As that's the main sort of reward mechanism for validators. Do you see that as being like an ever tightening problem, or do you think that growing the pie enough will make up
Mhm.
for that?
That's a great question. So I mean, this is actually I like this question a lot because it's like a long-term question, right? It's talking about
Hmm.
something that happens in years. And yes, I do think about these things in matter of years, right? For example, there's no slashing now, but I'm thinking about slashing already, right?
Right.
Um, I so validator economics have changed dramatically in the past year or so, right? It
Right.
used to be like commission, APY, right? All of this stuff, right? Block rewards, etc. Right? But nowadays, you see like there's lots of stuff right coming on, right? Its priority fees are far outstripping. I mean, again, it could be like a more or less transient phenomenon, right? Like it could be the congestion and stuff. But like it used to be like block rewards, which is the sort of inflation you talk about. That's like 90% of the validator's profit, and now maybe it's like 1/3, right?
Yeah.
And just a tease for you, like after TGE, we're gonna have some really interesting stuff about like what's it called? Eigenlayer calls it restaking,
Mm.
but like I mean, restaking is this buzzword, but like you can pay like validators not right now perform a needed service of validating the network, right? Validating blocks. Now with
Hmm.
Gito, they also perform this service of this mempool stuff, right? And like so like doing these auctions, and it's not impossible to think that that validators could do a lot of other things. For example, one of the things that we would love to see is on-chain storage, right? Like
Hmm.
storage on Solana is so expensive, so
Right.
expensive, right? That's why NFTs can't be on chain, right? And CNFTs are basically just sort of like pointing the thing to somewhere off the chain, right? That's how they can be cheap, right? But if you could
Yeah.
run like a validator sidecar, right, to tell these validators to also run storage, right, that would be a service
Right.
that many people would pay for, right? So and my point in saying this, and also a million other things, right? Compute maybe, right? Like maybe every validator has a GPU and they run that GPU too, right? I don't know, right? But the point is that
Right. That's
validator
interesting.
economics are going to change so much in the next few years, right? And like who knows what the next batch of validate, like who knows what the profit, where the profit will come from. So my answer is like
So you're kind of talking about almost a super network, right? Like, so we have things like Render and these other DePIN protocols that require GPUs, but what you're talking about is like, oh, well, why don't you just bolt that onto a validator
ex-
itself, and then the validator
exactly,
is
exactly,
functioning
yeah,
as a DePIN thing. I'm geeked out.
exactly,
I actually got goosebumps over that. That's how much of a nerd I am.
yeah,
All right,
yeah,
this is getting pretty heady. I
yeah.
think probably a good time to pass it off to the audience for any additional questions. Florg, I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, so guys, if you are the cat debt role or cats of culture role, feel free to request to come up to speak to ask your questions. In the meantime, we'll pass it back over to Sanctum. If you have any concluding remarks you wanted to say before we let the audience ask their questions.
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it short because God knows I've been droning on and on. Yeah, guys, thank you so much. I want to say thank you, Jupiter, for giving us this opportunity. Thank you, guys. Right, we really, really appreciate having this audience to tell people about our dream, about our vision for Sanctum. Right, and obviously, thank you all for coming, taking your time off on a Friday to listen to us. Right. I won't belabor what we're doing, but I say, in order for us to build this future where everybody has an LST, where there's this like awesome soul economy, right? We need everybody's help, right? We need everybody to buy in, to understand what we're doing, right? And so, I really appreciate the fact that all of you guys are here because, like we can't do this without you.
Cool.
Sweet.
I'll start bringing people up. I see there's one cat debt by the name of Machete. Machete, I'm going to let you up. There you go.
Hey
Hey,
guys,
how's it
how's it
going?
going? Really enjoyed the discussion today. Super excited about Adrasty and especially Sanctum. I've been following Sanctum for quite a bit of time now. I was just curious, with the single validator LSTs, are you guys planning on having either documentation or some kind of infrastructure to help validators actually set those up, or is that something that they have to figure out on their own, do it on their own, and then come in to get integrated into the Sanctum pools after?
Oh, that's a great question. We actually already have this documentation up
Oh,
on
awesome.
on learn.sanctum.so/docs. One of my team will put it on there right now. Yeah, so we have these documents. If you are a validator or you know a validator or actually a project, right? To be clear, right? Like it's not you don't have to have a validator to set up an LST. You can be a person and set up an LST. You don't have to have a validator. You don't even have to have any stake to set up an LST, right? To be absolutely clear. But if you are one of these projects, one of these validators, right? Check out our docs or reach out to us. Like like DM me, right? I will help you set it up. Like I promise, I will put, be available anytime. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'm not personally one, but one of the projects I'm in has been thinking about it, as well as getting back to setting up their own validator. So of course I already have mentioned Sanctum to them, and I think a couple other people in there have as well. So hopefully we'll get
Sweet,
them
man.
in there.
Yeah. DM us anytime. We have a Telegram. My DMs are open. Please, yeah, anytime.
Sweet. That was all I had.
Gotcha. I will request once again if anyone wants to come up to speak, to ask a question. If you're a cat dead or cat cultural, feel free to do so. Otherwise, post your questions in the chat and they'll be read on your behalf. I do see a question now from Liquidity Slushy. He had a couple questions. The first of which was, what's different between you and the other liquid staking providers?
Yeah. So as I said, I mean, so there are all these stake pools and LSTs. They are competing, right, to get stake from people, but they're also trying to grow the pie, right? I think the difference for us is that we are really the primary thing is that we are that liquidity platform, right? The unified liquidity layer for these guys to grow. So we are the soil, right, on which these flowers are blooming, basically. Yeah, that's how I think about it. Yeah.
I like that analogy. Yeah, I think I can add on to that. Like if you think of the staking as a whole as a pool, well, Sanctum is sort of the vision is the actual the pool itself, and then everything else is the water.
That's I mean,
Yeah.
we're honestly trying to find the right like analogy,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's a good one. Yeah.
There's sort of levels. Yeah, interesting. Do we have anything else there, Slurk?
I'll ask another one of his questions. How is staking different between Sol and ETH?
So again, everything comes down to like this liquidity fragmentation, this liquidity as a moat, right? Because without Sanctum, you have this inherent centralization of liquidity, right? You have massive barriers to entry because you need millions of dollars in ETH to just sort of like set up your own LST, right? When you have high barriers to entry, when you have this massive liquidity moat, this inherently leads to monopolistic competition. It leads to centralization, right? What Sanctum has done essentially is we democratize this liquidity, right? So it doesn't matter if you have like no money to set up your own validator, no money to set up like millions of dollars of seeding your Orca or Radium or Meteora pools. That doesn't matter at all, right? You can set up your LST and compete on a fair competition, right? On the fair basis, right? So that would be the difference. The difference is on Ethereum, it's like people are just fighting to be number one, right? And on LSTs, right, you have this fertile soil. I mean, just torturing the analogy a bit more, right? We have this fertile underlayer of soil, and then you just plant the flower there, and then let all of these 1,000 flowers grow, right? So I think that's the difference. Yeah.
Gotcha. I see another cat debt by the name of NFT Mods requested to speak. I'm gonna let him up. Here we go. NFT Mods, I let you up.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Yes, sir.
Cool. I actually just wrote the question down in the chat, but I'll say it again. I saw that FP Lee made a statement on X about a specific stance he had about bribes for the LFG candidates, and just wanted to hear his elaboration on that and how maybe he hopes to.
Yeah, so I mean, thanks a lot for this question, right? So I mean, this, basically we've seen lots of projects start bribing, their like voters to vote a particular way, right? I don't like this because I think that it just cheapens the process a little bit, right? I would love, I want LFG, I love Jupiter. I want LFG to have a great reputation, right? And I think if you have, I want voters to be voting on the projects that they think are best, the ones that they think are going to make Solana better, right? I don't want to be voting for the project they think that is going to pay them the most, right? I think that's not, I mean, maybe it's kind of like it's killing the goose, right? That lays the golden eggs in a way, right? You have this one platform with a great reputation from a great project, right? And, if you make it basically becoming a bribing platform, right, then, in some sense, there's no guarantee of quality, right? Like if you want Jupiter LFG to be known for like, yes, every single one of these projects that comes on is like a good project that could potentially become this massive unicorn, right? Then just, making it devolve into a bribing fest is not the way to go, right? And, I know I'm being naive, right? But I think like fundamentally, I think it cheapens the platform, right? It cheapens what we're all here for, right? So that would be my view.
Can
Can I also add something to this?
yeah,
If
please
you
do.
don't mind? Yeah, I also agree with you, and I believe that Jupiter is a great platform. And right now, basically, you can see teams that are like much more like they can be richer, right? And they can provide like extra incentives for you to vote. But I would say that this type of like bribing for the projects, I don't think that it's like kind of like a long-term interest for the team, because the real team, they really understand the value of these tokens that they are distributing, and they don't want like extra like 1 or 2% to be sold in the next year, right? It's just gonna affect the token price, and like in crypto, the best indicator of the success of the project is the price, right?
Totally.
So yeah, I believe that bribing is not really great, but we can't really kind of avoid it, right? But for me, I think that long-term projects, like they won't do it.
Yeah, I think so. The core working group has had quite a few discussions around this, just because it's been sort of the hot topic in the last, at least from the last vote. I think one of the big things is we saw the one project that did a pretty obvious, like about as obvious of a bribe as you can get. We're going to give you all tokens for voting for us. They lost pretty handily. There's still, jury is still out on if that's going to be the case moving forward, but the kind of the way we see it is that if there is a meaningful difference in future votes, then we can sort of address that. But as of right now, the one data point that we have says that it made no meaningful difference at all. And I think that's kind of an optimistic perspective, in that I think the incentives for the DAO as they are, which is the 0.75% of the token supply, and it being locked for 3 months, they sort of disincentivize short-term thinking, right? Because you're thinking, okay, what token here that I'm voting for is going to be doing the best in 3 months, not what is going to be doing the best when this all launches. But yeah, that's kind of the summary of the discussion so far. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Slorg.
Yeah, I would just kind of
Could I,
reiterate. Sorry, go ahead.
add something super quick? It'll be like 2 sentences.
Yeah, sure,
I
go
think
ahead.
it's interesting too, and maybe Lee could could see this kind of like centered around what his answer was, but like I also think it's interesting from like a user within the DAO, like the battle royale kind of like model. And I wonder if the DAO is discussed like in the future, maybe projects are just a yes or no from the community, and there's maybe like, to avoid like spamming too many projects, there's like a limit per month, as opposed to like 6 different projects that necessarily really aren't building anything similar to each other, and then sort of like pitting them like in the competition.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? As opposed to
Mhm.
like, here's who wants to launch, and it's like a yes or a no. So that's something, a model that I think could also mitigate like these like sort of like side inefficiencies that we're seeing. But I also see Slorg reply a lot that it's pretty diplomatic to really not touch your thing baby this early on in what you guys are doing. So I think that makes sense too. But I do think evaluating like the competition model in the future, as opposed to maybe like a pass fail, could be something worth exploring too.
Totally, yeah.
I would just reiterate the working group stance on this, is that we don't want to be too heavy-handed for the initial 3 to 5 votes, just so we see how things actually play out, because we can speculate all day the effects of bribes or incentives or whatever we want to call them, but we have to see, like, how do they actually play out in practice? Do they alter the vote dynamic in a meaningful way? So far, the one data point we have says no, not really. Also, Chemo addressed that the design of LFG, from the lockup to the 3-month lockup period, it does disarm the immediate appeal of incentives and short-term thinking. And I think a good point that Durden made, we had a town hall where we addressed this, and Durden made this point, but the greatest incentive is the project you think will do best in the long term, because people would prefer 1% of a 1 billion market cap project than 20% of a 100K market cap project. So yeah, I think we're just going to see how it plays out over the first 3 or so before being heavy-handed in our guidance.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for answering that, guys, and I really appreciate the clarity, and I can't wait to see how that goes. Last question, FP, and if I'm allowed to ask one more question, if there's time. I added this question also in the chat, but I'll say it. I see that you've onboarded over a dozen LSTs onto Sanctum or with Sanctum, and with all that liquidity going to those LSTs, how would you plan on incentivizing deep liquidity for INF so that the protocol works as intended?
That's a good question. I think honestly, I think this okay. So INF is basically, we think of it as this LP, right? It's this basket of LS. Sorry, I want just to explain what INF is, because for the folks here, if they don't know what it is, then the answer will obviously not make sense. So Infinity is a basket of LSTs, right? So it holds BSO, GDOSO, LaneSO, all the LSTs, right? And it allows for swaps between them, right? So it's, you can think of it kind of like a curve pool, right? Which, holding, or, 3 different assets, except in our case, we hold hundreds, right? So just a little bit of context of what Infinity is. And I think honestly, the answer of how we're going to incentivize deep liquidity for INF is it's just gonna it's just gonna do the best, right? Like it's just gonna have like really high APY, and already we're seeing that. So I'm not gonna make any promises. I'm not gonna say, oh, you're gonna have this much yield if you deposit. Like right now, we have some indicative figures, but I want to stress these are just indicative, right? But like if you just think of it, like if you have, let's say, a GDO Sol pool, right? 1/3 of that, like one half of that Sol is not earning yield at all. So your baseline is 3.5%, right? As opposed to if you have, holding, double side LSTs, right? And then, if you have, let's say, a GDO Sol, BSOL pool, okay, so both of them are earning yield, right? But here we have all of them, right? And so the trading volume is potentially 10x, or 20x, because for a GDO Sol, BSOL pool, you can only get, you can only service one kind of swap, right? GDO Sol, BSOL, or BSOL, GDO Sol. So 2 kinds of swaps, right? When you have our kind of swaps, if you've got 10 assets, that's like 100 different swaps. And so we expect the trading volume potentially to be like, much higher, right? And it will only get more and more over time, right? And the third reason is that because we are able to hold these LSTs, right, we're actually getting like very high APYs, right? Just native staking, right? Remember I told you guys that, there were lots of LSTs like Compassol, LaneSol, HubSol, PicoSol, which are all giving up their, validator rewards, MEVs and stuff, right? We are able to capture all of that return in our pool as well. So we are actually able to get like significantly higher staking yields as well as significantly higher trading yields, right, on the pool. Now, we may incentivize this in the future, right, with some points or token or whatnot. But my goal is that it should be clearly like the best place to provide, LST liquidity, just because of the way it's designed, right? We should not need some crazy liquidity mining rewards to make it profitable to put into the pool. That's not what I want.
Thank you.
I guess I will request one more time, if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask Sanctum, or if they'd like to hop up on the mic, please request now. This will be the last call for any questions. I see someone asked for a recap. This is being recorded right now. We'll post the recording and also a transcript of the recording. Yeah, just hang tight.
And I could start feeding the transcripts into GPT and maybe get a big summary.
Okay, it doesn't appear that there's any questions left, so I think we can end at that point. We're going to say goodbye to our guests, and then we'll reveal who's being introduced next week. So hang on for another minute or so. But yeah, thank you guys for both coming up here and giving what I believe were fantastic AMAs on both parts. I had a really good time, and we had a
Same.
nice back and forth, because I can always tell it's a good AMA when I can go off the question script and just naturally want to follow up. So yeah, really appreciate you guys coming on for this.
Awesome. Thank you for having us. Cheers.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, of course.
Ready?
And for the projects that we will be introducing next week for the AMA, we're going to do something a little bit unique. We're going to bring back the 3 projects who did not win from round 1. So these are Monkey Dex, Sourceful, and Uprock. And this is because we'll be defining how we handle reapplications in subsequent rounds. So we felt it was fair to grandfather them in, which really has the benefit of giving us very useful data on how projects not only respond to reapplication, but also we can get feedback on how their first application was, right? We can explore what improvements they made in response to feedback, what changes they made in response to the AMAs, maybe, and just commentary on the LFG process itself, which I feel is going to be very, very useful for us. So we will be bringing those three back next week and have their AMAs on the same day. So thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you for coming out and asking all your questions and listening. I think our retention rate this time was over 90%, which is pretty wild. But yeah, we'll see you guys next week.